Welcome to the GRN, the Growth and Resilience Network, where every episode brings you targeted stories and strategies about professional and personal growth and resilience. The intent of each episode is to educate, energize, and equip you with information and hopefully a bit of wisdom to apply in your life and within your community. Hi, I'm Steve Piscitelli, your host, coming to you from my headquarters, my world headquarters here in Atlantic Beach, Florida. Today, we continue our 7-episode series that highlights transformational stories about community building, community sustainability. Now, each of these stories will appear in my soon-to-be-released book sometime around the beginning of 2019. The book's going to build on 7 core values for purpose and growth, 7 core values that help communities grow. The values: relationships, relevance, rainbows, resources, responsibility, reflection, and resilience all interconnect and support one another. Now, when I speak of community, it doesn't have to be a geographic location. You'll see from these stories and from the way the book evolves that the concept of community can and does connect to groups of like-minded people, wherever they might be, wherever they might congregate, however they might congregate. Now, people who come together and grow from the support they get from within themselves and their community members. Now, this episode focuses on one such community and how relationships formed the root of the Asbury Memorial United Methodist Church in Savannah, Georgia. Now, you can read about this story in the book, but also on my blog. If you go to one of my May 2018 posts, you'll find it there. And in early May of 2018, one afternoon, I caught up with the Reverend who turned around the church. Billy Hester and his wife, Sherry, came to Asbury in 1993. By a rather interesting route. Billy had left Savannah to study and perform in theater in New York. That's where he met his wife, and also one Norman Vincent Peale. It's where he heard the call and eventually made his way back to Savannah to take the helm of the Asbury Memorial United Methodist Church. Now, it was, as cliche as it might sound, a dying congregation that Billy and Sherry resurrected with the help of the remaining members. The Hesters started with 25 aging members and today have a vibrant community of 650 or so congregants. Now, how did they do it? That's what this podcast will attempt to discover. Billy, as he's known to his church members, and Preston Hodges, the lay leader of the church, sat with me to explain, among other things, the importance and application of values like acceptance, authenticity, listening, reflection, vulnerability, and growth, and how those helped build this church to what it is today. Now, in the first clip that we will pick up with during our conversation, you're going to hear Preston speaking. He kind of kicks off the conversation for us. Then Billy will chime in, and we go back and forth for the remainder of this podcast. So sit back, take a listen. The importance of relationships in building community.
As a lay leader, something that I got really involved in as soon as I became lay leader was trying to address the problem of how do we find out who's missing on Sunday and make sure that we contact them. And our church administrator, Randy, has developed a system where we can identify who's been missing for 3 weeks, I think. And we have a system amongst the staff to call them. So we have a list of people every week that we call if we haven't seen them for a while, and just say, hello, we miss you and hope all is well, and hope to see you in church Sunday.
Wow.
And the feedback has been phenomenal. They love it. They love
They don't see it as intrusive.
I have not had a single example of that.
They
Not a
see it
one.
as somebody that cares. And you miss me.
Absolutely. And even a woman, I told Billy about this Tuesday, that has been a little unhappy about not being communicated enough with. I called her last week, and she was just lovely. She was so glad to get the call, and yeah, it's been. It was very difficult at first because we didn't have a methodology
Gotcha.
for identifying who wasn't there. We just kind of had to be word of mouth, and people sitting on your pew. Did you notice anybody missing? But again, out of our computer system that we already had, Randy figured out a way to
We
to
talk
do
about
that.
relationship building.
Oh, it's fabulous. The two things that have been done just in the last couple of years, I think, that are really changing things is that calling the missing, and this thing that Billy started, this congregational care committee. We meet once a month and talk about those folks that are sick or bereaved or whatever, and make sure that there are numerous people that are connecting with them.
Wow.
So I mean that's a huge ministry, and the group of people in that committee they're fabulous.
One thing that's helped with that
Pull it to
is
you. There you
that
go.
when I first came, we had such an older congregation, and all the new people, though, were working people. And so we were really missing the volunteers because people were so busy working, they didn't have extra time. So what's helped us a lot is as our younger people have matured and retired, now we're getting more help from the congregation, from the volunteers. Preston's been a great help with this congregational
Wow.
care team. And then we have, as we've grown, we've attracted people who've retired and moved to Savannah, and they're wanting something to do, and so that's helped a lot too.
Cool. What is a community?
This organization that I'm connected to, called Citizen Advocacy, that Billy mentioned a little while ago, we talk a great deal about the beloved community, and the director of that organization wrote a book by that title. So beloved, I think, is a big part of what it is that community is. There are all different kinds of communities that exist for a lot of different reasons, but they all seem to have the same thing in common, that there's something that binds people together, that they're able to communicate, that they're able to listen and be heard. I think that's a big part of what community is. They're able to be appreciated.
Yeah.
It's something Christians probably don't talk enough about, but the first Christians in the book of Acts talks about this incredible community, and where everybody, well, they especially looked after the widows and children, and they all lived together, and they shared their property. And I mean, it's kind of like a commune, and maybe here in the United States we don't want to talk about that kind of so much, but in fact, there's an incredible. Are you familiar with Koinonia Farm down in near Americus, Georgia?
No,
Plain?
I am not.
Oh my gosh, you need to hear about this.
Okay.
Clarence Jordan, and it's spelled like Jordan. You might remember Hamilton Jordan.
Yeah.
He was a relative of Clarence Jordan, was a Baptist minister, but very social justice oriented, who then went to UGA to get a degree in agriculture, created a farm near Americus and Plains, Georgia, in the 1942, where blacks and whites lived together in South Georgia. It's still there. It's still going on. In the 60s, they were bombed and everything because of the growth of the civil rights.
And the same spelling, it's the same.
Koinonia, same
Koinonia,
word. They based
okay.
it on the same thing. In fact, a guy named Millard Fuller stopped by there one time on his way and was so taken by this, he started living there, and he and Clarence developed Habitat for Humanity. That's where it started.
And that's where
there.
Jimmy Carter gets connected.
Yeah. In fact, I did a funeral with Jimmy a few years ago because this guy who was a member here, His parents lived on Koinonia Farm and knew Jimmy Carter, so Jimmy spoke at the funeral.
Oh.
Yeah, so all the time. And I got to thinking about the church. It's really the only thing I can think of where it starts at birth. I mean, we celebrate the birth, and it goes all the way to your death. We're the community from birth to death. Yeah.
Something you said, that religion, these weren't your words, but if there's something's gone awry. There's like a bad name. It's not what you're describing. So what is it that tears apart this idea of koinonia? What tears apart the community?
Well, one thing just as far as religion's concerned, and Preston knows he's heard this from me a lot, but we certainly got off the wrong track when we made our faith all about getting to heaven. About the afterlife, where Jesus, who is our teacher, was talking about bringing the kingdom of God on earth, justice happening here, helping each other here, helping the poor, helping the homeless. And that's why so many of us who really get into what Jesus was about are so frustrated with, so many people you hear on TV and everything are talking about, the more conservative approach, are you saved? That's not what he was about at all. And it was about taking care of each other, bringing the kingdom of God on earth. And so we really got off the wrong path, with that.
That's very basic.
Yeah. I mean, the whole message got distorted.
When you came to 1993, you come to Asbury. And again, it's virtually dead. 25 people, old, aged. Okay, the bigger church wants to close it down.
Right.
What existed with those 25 souls?
Well, one thing that happened, a woman named Elizabeth Laracy, I'll never forget this, because a minister never hears this, but she said, Billy, because they had already been told to leave. The higher-ups had said, y'all need to start looking for a new church. She said, Billy, do anything you want to do, just get us back. And ministers never hear, do anything you want to do. And I think maybe later Elizabeth might have regretted that a little bit, because we did some crazy things. But no, I mean, they were great. As Preston he was here early enough and long enough to know most of those folks, and they were a special group. But what happened is Sherry and I, one thing listeners would need to know is not only was the church going through this, but that we were in a very poor neighborhood. Mm-hmm. It was called Area C back then for Savannah. They labeled it Area C, low income, high crime. And it's still kind of tough today, but back in '93, it was a lot worse. You literally would get high walking from the parking lot into the church. I mean, you could smell the marijuana right from all over. And we have had a lot of homicides here in our area.
The ribbons right out the window, I can see them.
That's for Savannah as a whole. But we have had them, I remember one year we had the last homicide in December, we had the last homicide of the year, and then right at early January, that was like 100 yards west of us, and then 100 yards east of us, we had the first homicide of the new year. So I'll never forget that year. But what we did, Sherry and I, our forte was in theater. And our problem was, how do you get people here, even coming to have a community, And so our forte, the only thing we knew to do was theater. Also, which kind of worked in with that, is that we had a heart, being in theater, we knew, and at our church in New York, we knew a lot of LGBT people. And of course, down here at that time especially, there was no church place for them to go to, hardly. Very, very few opportunities for them. And they were in the theater community here in Savannah. And Sherry, I was still working on the church, but Sherry still got involved with local community plays, and we met some people, and she started inviting them here, and then we said, let's do our own plays and have open auditions, because you can't do these musicals with 20 people who are all 80 years old. Yeah. But no, the real purpose was hopefully these people. We didn't want to use these people because we wanted people to come. And so these people who were in shows together developed a community. And what you hear often in theater, Steve, too, is that is your community when you do a show. People get very bonded when you're in a cast together. Now, the problem with people who are just doing that out there is the show ends. But fortunately, if the show ends, you still have the opportunity to be part of the community here. And that was the kind of the goal. Well, this doesn't have to end for you. Just come on Sundays and that kind of thing. Plus, people who came to the shows said, maybe I'll try this on a Sunday too. So that's how we got people.
And
started.
did you start them like within the first year?
94. I came in 93. We started in 94.
And you knew it. And I'm following. I get your I get your emails. I mean, and the newsletter and there's always something going. I mean, you got those things, and then there's always something about, I think you call it When Shadows Fall.
Right? That's when people pass away. Yeah, we very much let people know on what's happening, who needs help. We have a flower team ministry that's part of this congregational care team that Preston mentioned. But and as far as events and services, one of the new additions, I say new additions, it's been about 11 or 12 years now, is the God on Broadway services, where we weave the Broadway musical into the worship service. And that draws, we get a lot of our new members from people who come and experience that.
Let me share
please.
a little different twist about the community that Billy came into. And how remarkable they were. They were a community, but very different from our current community.
This original 25.
Yeah, group of 25. They were a very different. They were a conservative group of people. That was my take on them. Not at all like where this church is today as a very progressive Methodist church, and yet, coming out of that conservative community, somehow they valued that community, the people in it, regardless of how they believed. They regarded that community of people so highly that they were willing to say, Billy, do anything that you need to do to save this community. People I know had to have had difficulty with the LGBT community coming in. They had to from their past experiences. But they said, what the heck? Because they wanted to hold their community together. And then they became a backbone of this church.
So what was, that's really interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting dynamic.
People.
I'm just fascinated that she and the 25 give you free range to just hold this together. We don't want to lose. What was this? What was it that they wanted? I mean, it wasn't the building, or maybe it was. Was it the building? What was this that they wanted?
Well, first of all, they did have that koinonia themselves. I mean, they came from that background of if somebody's hurting, you take over food to them. They really looked out after each other. As each one was dying out, they all kept caring for each other. They had mission groups. They had home groups. They just kept getting smaller and smaller. So for them, it was really what the church was all about. I'm sure there was some pride there too. That, it also, they've had great friends who gave their lives to this church and had its ministry. And I think that was part of it too, that it was just so hard. They had given so much to this church to help people. They had seen how the good it had done, and just hope, can we do this kind of good again? Kind of thing, I think.
Again, with a very different theology, but the community, nevertheless, theology aside,
Yeah.
was this doing for each other.
So the beloved community, the koinonia, I mean, I'm looking at the 7 R's, and everything comes. I'm hearing it's they had a responsibility in their own hearts, at least, to the 25, to or whatever the number was. That we're responsible as a group to one another. We are not just responsible to me.
Right.
My job is to make your life better.
Right.
Am I?
Yes.
That's what I'm hearing. So you've got that, and it's all about relationships. I mean, it's they care.
And just to give you, I know you don't want too much
No,
theology here, but
No.
what's really cool is, for so long Jesus, they said, what's the 2 greatest commandments? Is he was asked, and he said, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. But then in the Gospel of John, he says, I give you a new commandment. And he does this right after washing their feet. He says, I give you a new commandment. Love others as I have loved you. So it's not just about kind of looking out after your neighbor or not causing any problems. It's about serving them.
What do you see as the values? I mean, I'm hearing the koinonia, the relationships, the connections, the communication. In addition, are there some other values that you see as the foundation for this community to build from 25 to 650 and 250 plus on any given service in the church? Okay, is it simply the relationships and the caring, and that this is genuine and authentic?
Well, you kind of gave 2 words that come to my mind that have been really important here are acceptance and authenticity. Those 2, I think, speak so much of what we try to be about here: acceptance and authenticity. And because I think those are 2 things that a lot of people haven't felt from the church. A lot of times they felt not included. And then even people, I'm not just talking about people who are homosexual, but just people in general feeling like they have to pretend to be something they're not in church.
Yeah, and to be clear, this church isn't just a church for LGBT.
Right.
That's a part of your population.
Yeah, maybe 35%, 40%, something like that.
Yeah. Would you want to add to that,
Yeah,
Preston?
I just finished a book called Sapiens. You might be familiar with it. It's written by an Israeli historian. The subtitle is A Brief History of Humankind. Fascinating book. He raised the question at some point, what was it that enabled European civilization to leap so far ahead of the rest of the world and move into the scientific revolution that changed the world? And he said it was an I don't know attitude. I think that's another value that's very much a part of this church, at least from my perspective. When I first came here, I don't remember exactly how the conversation went, but I commented to Billy something to the effect that, we don't say the Apostles' Creed. And rather than give me some kind of explanation as why we don't, Billy said, well, what do you think about that? It's that freedom to explore your own religious path. And everybody, can't say everybody, I think the vast majority of people here are in a search. They're on a path trying to have a better understanding of what they believe and what they don't believe. I grew up in the Methodist Church. I grew up in a conservative Methodist family, and my dad also died very young, but he was a pillar of our church. And so religion has always been very important to me. The church has always been very important to me. But the church that stayed the same and always had that aura about them that they did know everything, that church for me died.
Wow.
If I had to stay in that church, I would not be in a church. And then I found Billy and I found Asbury and said, well, this is from the first time I was here.
Yeah. Put it online. What does that say about the preacher who's leading the congregation, who is willing to say, well, what do you think? Or accept the I don't know. What does it say about the leader?
Well, my favorite sermon every year is when we talk about doubting Thomas, and I'm right there with Billy. I love Thomas. I love making yourself. The sermon he preached last Sunday was the importance of being vulnerable. Well, when you admit that you don't know something, that you don't have absolute truth all wrapped up with a pretty package, you're making yourself vulnerable, and again, I would think the vast majority of people here are willing to do that, to say, I don't know.
But you're heavy on reflection also. I mean, big on reflection. Because if you're saying, well, what do you think? When you're saying, where's the Apostles' Creed? Well, what do you think about that? As opposed to, yeah, we decided to get rid of it for A, B, and C, and then on you go. It's just, you're getting people... And to say it out loud, which is that vulnerability that, my God, they might not agree with what I say. Well, okay, maybe they will.
Right.
That's a leader.
Yeah, well, and Arthur Caliandro helped me a lot with that, the guy who followed Norman Vincent Peale. He was very good at that, and even, he went to therapy and encouraged the staff to be in therapy. So we wouldn't put our own baggage onto somebody else, and he shared that from the pulpit, and that helped me a lot.
Yeah. Well, and I'm also, you do a lot of listening. I mean, that sounds almost oxymoron. Well, shouldn't you listen if you're and that comes back to the koinonia,
and part of it is we've gotten into some. I've started enjoying some of what Christian mystics, and I mentioned that word one time out here, and it kind of freaked people out. The mystics are we sometimes the cult, as Billy talking about, but the Christian mystics, because have been around forever, and just basically we're really good with prayer and that kind of thing, but also being very comfortable with mystery and not having to know it all.
Yeah.
And it's taken, I just noticed as a Christian, as I've matured, what it's been more about is letting go of the things I've needed to
let go.
Because as a Christian, when I thought I was a strong Christian as a young person, I thought it was all about having everything lined up and knowing everything. And it was just the other way around.
Wow. Yeah, and I'm hearing one of the things I've been involved in is I'm taking a workshop. This is level 2 now for me in improv comedy. One of the key, and I learned this the first time I went through improv at level 1, and then they really build on it in level 2, is that anytime you're on stage, it's never about you. You have to develop yourself, obviously, and you got to commit to whoever your character is in that moment. What you always do is make your partner look better. You have to listen to what the partner is saying.
Sermon,
And I have used that at times in some talks of mine, the idea, because one of the cardinal principles, the first one you learn in improv is yes and. So that if you say to me, I'm your preacher, and I say, no, you don't look like my preacher, I've killed the scene. It's dead. We can't go further. But I say, yeah, you are that lean guy that I see up there every week, and you keep on with it. So now I embellish you, I enhance you, and I hear that in what you're talking about, which is really,
that's a great way to.
It's really cool.
Listening that goes on here. Billy, members of the congregation listening to each other. We have lots of small groups of classes and Bible studies and book studies or whatever, and where it's just great discussion, listening. And Billy said something a little earlier, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but something to the effect that, as we all know, until you really know somebody, we tend to, if they're very different from us, we tend to fear them. At worst.
Yeah.
But what's happened here is we have a lot of very different people here, a lot of different lifestyles, a lot of different ways of seeing the world. But we listen to each other because he's created that atmosphere.
Yeah.
And that's what's helped to build the community even stronger. It's remarkable. It's truly remarkable.
And Preston's so right. Those smaller groups are essential. You may have heard it before. To keep a large growing church small. You got to have the small group, meaning small in a good way, kind of like how those 25 people were with each other when we got here.
Yeah.
That kind of koinonia helping. You can't do that if you don't know them, if you don't know somebody's just lost their child or whatever, unless you develop those connections and relations.
How do you do that? I'm hearing that you do that, but I haven't heard it. How do you connect the theology, the community, to Preston's dreams, to the person next to him, behind him in the pew? Or do you go that way?
Well, I'm going to take it from the worship experience and sermon. I'm going to let Preston kind of take it from the community member. How about that? Does that work for you? Just because what you were talking about with the classrooms, two things I try to do when I pray just every time I work on a sermon, I always ask this. But first of all, present something where where people can identify with me, that we connect somehow. And a lot of times that's about being vulnerable. First of all,
connect to that.
Right. First of all, I want to come across as a know-it-all. That's a turnoff. Second of all, it lowers their defenses. They're more receptive to receiving something. And then probably the most important thing is, why am I saying what I'm saying? What difference is it making for them? If I'm just trying to tell them how much I know about the Bible or what I think about God, so what? What's impact is it going to make on their life? Why are we spending this time together? Why should I be saying that? So I do always try to do those two things, and hopefully, and I think the more I ask those questions, almost the better the sermon.
When you listen to Billy's sermons, I'll put it in my kind of, when I listen to Billy's sermons, I think, go and look at how Jesus taught. He didn't talk about dogma. Billy doesn't talk about dogma. He talks about life and living together, and he talks about community. So that starts the process of people feeling good about being here. A lot of people come here, and I include myself here. We were hurting. I was hurting. I was going through a divorce, my second divorce, 20-year marriage and an 8-year marriage. And in my family, divorce was said with a hush, like cancer.
Yeah.
Divorce. So I was, I could see it written across my forehead. And then a lot of our LGBT community, they have been hurt so badly, wanting to have a religious experience, but being shunned by the institutionalized church. One of our lesbian ladies said one time she found Asbury a safe place to land. Well, that's what he creates. It starts with his sermons, because that's what he's suggesting to us, that we're all searching, we're all on a path, we're all valuable children of God, and we need to work together to bring that heaven on earth. That it's not anything that he can do or I can do. It's only a we can do.
And and as I'm listening, I go back to my question: how does it help people get to their dreams? Oh my gosh, that's the basis. If you've got a safe place to start from, then you can now start putting your foot out a little further, and you start exploring, and you start. The vulnerability is okay because these people accept it, and they're not going to beat you up. Yeah, and they all understand that. And we're not going to laugh at you. We're not going to ostracize you.
Yeah, and I've been reading a lot about loneliness, that it's been the irony of our world is that we're getting all of these devices now where we can communicate more frequently and be in touch with more people, and yet people seem to be lonelier and lonelier.
Yeah.
It's not the real touching. It's not talking like this. And so, and it really frightens me about churches, so many churches shrinking, because it's the church, I think, one of the main ways, like I said, from birth to death, where we can touch each other and connect the way people really should be connecting with each other. And encouraging people to connect with people who they didn't realize they could. That's a beautiful thing that happens here. I look back at some people who came 12 years ago, and I see them, how they relate to some people. I'm going, that never would have happened 12 years ago. That's really incredible. But yeah, it's scary about the society where we're getting further and further detached from the old time where people would sit on the porch and talk to each other,
One of our members, a new member, she says, a loving, open, and accepting church that includes all of us as Jesus would, with love without judgment. Great for kids, youth, adults, seniors, with opportunities for all to serve. The arts figure prominently in worship services and beyond. Reverend Billy Hester and his wife Sherry are the soul and heart of Asbury. The Asbury choir and music program are excellent and uplifting. As for Billy's sermons, amazing. Just listen on the website and decide. You're always welcome.
Now, how about that, folks? You're always welcomed. That's community, a safe place to land, an open-minded community that provides a safe place to land. Now, think of that. Such a caring environment. Maya Angelou had said, the ache for home lives in all of us. The safe place where we can go as we are and not be questioned. So thank you, Reverend Billy Hester and Preston Hodges Jr. Folks, you can go to their website, asburymemorial.org, and find out more about what they do. You could hear the sermons, the weekly sermons, and watch them also. And again, I always thank you, the listeners, for joining us today. Without you, there is no Growth and Resilience Network. I thank you for sharing our podcast with family, with friends, colleagues, and community leaders. Visit my website, stevepiscitelli.com, for more information about upcoming conversations on the GRN and about my programs and other resources for your personal growth and resilience. A quick note, you will be hearing in December the third episode in this particular series, all highlighting one of the 7 R's for purpose and growth, the 7 core values. So, folks, until we meet again, either virtually or somewhere in person around this great nation, this is Steve Piscitelli from my world headquarters here in Atlantic Beach, Florida, reminding all of us to choose well, live well, and be well, and continue to create, share, and savor powerful moments. Bye-bye, folks.